Welcome to another wonderful episode of the Getting Defensive podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is Mr. Andrew Kalat. How you doing?
Good. How are you, sir?
So good it hurts.
Yeah. Have any of your orchids escaped lately?
No, but that one is pretty damn big, and I'm worried about it.
Well, you know, if you need any flamethrower support, I'm nearby.
No, God, no. That thing is expensive. Anyway, before we get going any further, a reminder that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employers, even those of us who do not have employers.
Well, you're married, so.
That's true. I do have a boss. So anyway, we have a wonderful guest, a very special guest today, and I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce him.
When you say special, you mean like short bus special?
No.
Because that's mean, Jerry.
No, that is not what I meant. That is not at all what I meant.
Anyway, I am pleased and honored to introduce our guest today, Martin Fisher, who we've known for many a year. And I can't even remember when Martin and I first met, many, many years ago. But like us, he's a grizzled veteran of the industry, over 20 years information security, including 13 as CISOs of major health organizations, which, God love you. Recently just finished up 10-year stint as the CISO of Northside Hospital Group, where he built the cybersecurity group from the ground up in a very complex, challenging, multiple hospital environment. Previous to that, he's got 5 years as CCERT manager for a major airline, also based in Atlanta, and it's Delta. It's probably not private. It's on LinkedIn. Not only that, he's also a veteran who served in the Georgia Army National Guard in various roles in armored vehicles. I think was commissioned as second lieutenant, if I read his LinkedIn properly. So, man has been around, seen some things. Somebody we wanted to have on the show for a while, but he had to kind of rebuild his office and his studio, so we had to wait. But now we've got him. So, Martin, welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be here, guys. Long-time watcher, first-time caller.
That's fair. Not first-time stalker, though. We've caught you outside the studio a couple times.
The protective order expired.
That's true. How'd I do on the bio? Did I get anything wrong?
No. I mean,
I missed anything?
No, you're straight up. That works. Because the quality of my LinkedIn page.
Look, it helps for stalking. It made my job easier.
Fair.
Don't click on the links he's going to send you now.
So seriously, welcome. In fact, we had planned to interview you first of anybody, but we had some timing issues. But we're glad to have you here. But
I'm glad to be here.
would love to. Thanks, man. I would love to hear about your time as CISO at Northside, and you recently stepped away. And I think for a lot of folks that may not know, and I only kind of know how different and uniquely challenging healthcare information security can be. So, I mean, how was it? I mean, you've got a lot of time under your belt.
Yeah. So it was just short of 10 and a half years there when I was the first full-time InfoSec person they hired. It was after a bad thing happened. And there was a lot of executive support around the program because what they were wanting to do was work with HHS and the OCR to avoid a really damaging. We did that, and it created a lot of really great relationships with senior leadership. We generated a lot of value within the organization, and over 10 plus years, I'm really proud of what we built. When I exited a little over a month ago, 22 people on the security staff, but their security functions all through IT. And the relationships with IT and the application side and the business side were awesome. because there's also this emergency management function that cybersecurity has to play with the Joint Commission, which kind of pivots into how healthcare is a little different. I talk about this a lot. When you come to a hospital, you're not there because you want to wear their clothes, eat their food, or sleep in their bed. All of those three things are not 5-star sorts of things. You're there because you or someone you care about, someone you love, is injured or sick and needs care. And the worst thing the security program can do is hurt them. So in a lot of places, people talk about, we're all taught in security school, there's the security triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And most people look at it in that order. And for most industries, that's probably right. Healthcare, it's flipped. If the machines aren't available, caregivers can't deliver the best possible care. Mm-hmm. They got to be able to trust what they see. And let's be honest, especially post-change healthcare, are anyone's records confidential anymore?
Right.
So, my big thing was making sure that the program understood and everyone on the team understood, we're here to protect the patients, because there are so many devices attached, some of the most fragile, patients at a hospital. So for me, a lot of, I think, what we accomplished was built around letting clinical leadership realize and understand that we were a patient safety function. And we very deliberately modeled our communications after how patient quality, patient safety communicated to the organization. I made choices that in little sidebars with other CISOs, they're like, "You did what?" I'm like, "Yeah, I allowed that to happen because there was a robotic surgery going on, and I'm not going to stop that." And then, during the pandemic, things got really weird with all the new connectivity options and the requirements, and the technology staff supporting mass vaccination clinics. It was a lot, but I think the big thing is, and we were talking about it before we started recording, that very few companies are in the security industry. Hospitals are not there to be secure. Hospitals are there to deliver safe and efficacious treatment to patients. Mm-hmm. So for me, my alignment with the organization was, how do I protect that? How do I, especially some of the more fragile devices? I mean, you look at something like an MRI or a CT, they're hideously expensive. They have a service life of over 20 years. So think the state, even 10, 12, 15 years ago, of what technology was like from a security perspective. Those devices are still on the network. And because they're FDA devices, you can't patch or change them. So it changes the dynamic with the security team. And it's a great ride. I mean, I didn't leave because I was upset about it. If we want, we can talk about the reasons that I had to step away. But it's just one of those things where I love working for 13 years in not-for-profit community-based healthcare, because I was working for companies that did good with a capital G. Mm-hmm. And that was huge for me. And if you're someone who's thinking about, a security career, you're going to learn a lot in a healthcare environment. And you're going to see things that a lot of other folks don't see, and you have a chance to do good. So,
yeah. I imagine, I'm sure Jerry's got plenty of questions too, but I imagine you're kind of talking about those MRI machines or other equipment. So they're probably having some sort of basic computer that's running them that, like you mentioned, you can't patch and you can't really change, right? And they're not meant to be iteratively updated like we think of as a typical machine. So
right, because most of them are running on Windows and an EEPROM. And fun fact, Windows XP Service Pack 2 from an EEPROM is still supported by Microsoft.
Wow.
Yeah. It wasn't too long ago that we saw, a Windows NT4 box on the network that was still being used. We found Windows CE medical devices. These devices still work. And, when you look at a hospital system, as much money as they have in PCs and servers, most acute care hospitals that maybe have like some outpatient surgery centers and all that probably have 2 to 3 times that amount of money invested in medical devices. So the ability to simply say, hey, that MRI is unsecure, let's take it out, that decision's not going to, that choice is not reasonable.
Right.
So as a security person, I never, I would occasionally ask, well, when will this device be deprecated? So how, essentially asking the question, how long do I need to come up with a plan? How long does my plan need to last? Because, with some of these devices, to remove, a CT, you essentially build the room around it, right? Because it's in a Faraday cage. And there's specific HVAC, because if the device breaks and helium vents into the room, you've got to be able to extract that. Otherwise, you're going to smother the patient. So there's just so much going on in that you have this really sensitive thing that you don't want anyone to touch, but you can't touch it either. And it makes for some interesting problem solving. I mean, for me, I was really fortunate to have some great architects on my team who were really open-minded and were willing to have a whole bunch of stuff thrown on the table and figure out, how do I rearrange these Lego blocks to make the thing we need to make? That's for me, that's the key to victory in the healthcare space, is being able to take what you have and do the best you can with it.
Yeah. Because I can imagine the flip side of the conversation is, if these devices are so insecure, they're going to get knocked off the network in some way. That's another availability problem.
Huh?
So how do I keep them safe so that they can do their job, but not also break them in some other way while trying to do what we typically would do, which is patch and iterate and upgrade and, apply the most recent thing and EDR tools, all these things that I just can't do, as I understand it. I've never worked in healthcare, but based on what you've told me over the years, I just can't do that kind of stuff in that environment. So it takes all those typical techniques and throws them out the window.
It does. And if the people who I think do really well in healthcare security are ones who don't look at that and go, they're like, that's a problem I want to solve. What can I do? And I think the more creative and the more focused on the patient safety outcome InfoSec folks in healthcare are, the better their orgs are. Because saying, hey, I can't protect that if it doesn't have EDR on it, well, you just gave up. Just gave up. Is that what we want to do as InfoSec people? I don't think so. The cavalry guy in me is like, no, we don't. So yeah, it's just, again, it's a fantastic environment, but it also, it takes a toll. It does take a toll.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds extra stressful, and we already know this industry is stressful because, you're literally dealing with lives.
And I don't want to say you become numb to it. That's not the right word, but you begin, for me at least, over time, I began to be able to better scale what was going on. Because it's so easy. Like, you get some external audit thing that says, hey, I could get persistence here and I could, have a sentinel event in your NICU. Yes, you could. However, to do that, these 24 steps have to be followed, and I can either detect or prevent upstream. So it became one of trying to be, and you use this word, Andy, and it's true. You got to be pragmatic, right? If a nation state wants into a hospital, they're going to get there. That's not the threat. I'm as a hospital CISO, I was much more concerned about your average, everyday ransomware folks, people wanting folks to click on links, more of that. Because those really advanced actors, they don't want to be found. They're not going to mess with the biomed stuff. They're going after whatever it is they want. So you have to really do your threat modeling carefully and not just assume everyone's out there to destroy your clinical device network, because they're not. Now, some of them inadvertently might, and that's part of the threat modeling process, right? A ransomware actor doesn't care that they're encrypting radiology devices. They really don't, because they don't know. But it's not their intent. So again, I think by really looking at who the potential threat actors are and threat modeling effectively and pragmatically, and then, that's going to give you like 1,000 things you need to do. No organization can do 1,000 things. Most organizations can do 3. So you take the top 3 and you work on them. Finish those, have a beer, work on the next 3.
So I perceive that you've, at least for the clinical devices, you had to kind of adopt a posture of treating them as black boxes, and you have to build your program around them and kind of facilitate the nuances of what they require. And I think as an industry, we've gotten very dependent on things, again, like EDR. And while it's kind of horrific to think about, CrowdStrike blue screening the robotic robot or the surgical robot while it's doing its thing, I'm left wondering, some of the challenges that you've had to architect around probably have meaningful implications to the rest of the industry, where I feel like we've kind of gotten away from some of the basics. And it sounds to me like, as I listen to you talk and in discussions in the past, you've had to focus a lot more on kind of the basic block and tacklings of architecture and network design and things like that.
Yeah, it's architecture design, incident response, and business continuity, especially in a hospital because of the way it works. It's not when there's going to be a problem. It's, there's going to be, it's not if, it's when. CrowdStrike, right, caused a significant outage at my hospital. And that isn't even a bad guy. But because of the way the hospital implements the requirements of the Joint Commission under emergency management, and because of the relationship security and IT have with the business, we were able to essentially be fully back up within more or less 72 hours, even after 20K plus machines got blue screened.
Wow.
That's the key. It's like, yes, I want to prevent all the bad things I can, but if that's your 100% focus, when the bad thing happens, if you don't have a plan, and if you don't have a plan that you kind of exercise and work with, you're toast. You're complete toast, because the bad thing's going to happen. So expect it. My job as a CISO was not, I was asked a couple times when I first, both orgs, can you guarantee we won't have a security incident? And I'm like, not, and anyone who tells you they can is not qualified for this job.
Mm-hmm.
Do everything I can to minimize it. But no, and I think in healthcare, it's easier for people to understand that, because you can have a physician who's working with a patient, and the physician and the clinical team did everything right. The patient still expires. This is what they did. It's just sometimes, you can do all the right things and you still lose.
Yeah.
And the question is, then what do you do? Kind of going back to my ROTC days. What now, Lieutenant? What now? Right. And you've got to keep going. And I think I see this sometimes in some folks in what we do. They just want to throw their hands up and say, this wasn't my fault. Yeah, we're all ransomware. It's not my fault. Walk away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We actually, over the years of doing this, I've interviewed people that we kind of probe into that area. And if you're that kind of person, I didn't want you on my team. because again, the job of the department was not just security. It's, hey, we're protecting a hospital, we're protecting patients. And when the bad thing happens, we're in this just like everybody else. And it's an interesting world. I think in the time I've been a CISO, we've seen people who become so specialized, and if it's outside their lane, they're kind of like, no, not me. And I don't want this to become, old man, shouts at cloud, but I think that's a challenge in our profession, right? We need to be able to, especially at leadership levels, realize that we serve a larger organization and their goals are our goals. And if you can't get your brain around it, you're not going to be effective.
But it sounds like, you and the staff that you looked for needed to kind of have some deep emotional resilience and capability to persevere. And a lot of people talk about burnout and stress. So, I mean, how did you manage that? Or is that something, do you think, is just a name to the type of people that you hired? Or, how did you manage through that?
That's a great question. I think there were some folks who, so one of the things that we did when we hired a person, if I got 3 to 5 years from an analyst or an engineer, that was a win. Because again, I work for a not-for-profit community-based hospital here in Atlanta. There are organizations that have orange aprons and, widgets on their collar, and who will pay a whole lot more money for a qualified analyst or engineer than I ever could.
Sure.
So, yeah, we took people, and if they could understand what they were here for, and they spent 3 to 5 years with me and then moved on, that's a win, right? They're exiting better than we found them, right? Sort of, and that's awesome. But I think for folks who are there for a long time, and this kind of gets to, where I was, you can only run at 100% for so long.
Yep.
Jerry, I know you and I've taught this, near and dear to your heart, where, as a leader, there comes a time when you're like, I just can't do this anymore. And it's not because it's about you, right? And at least for me, it wasn't. It was where I'm at. I can't serve the organization the way this role needs to. And I went through this process with my boss, and she was amazing. And we came up with a process by which it was the most graceful exit I've ever heard anyone talk about, right? I've been very fortunate and very privileged to have some interesting roles and work with amazing people. And, it came down to, I just couldn't do it anymore. I was experiencing some health problems that, when your doctor says, do you have a lot of stress in your life? Yes.
A wee bit.
Is work stressful? Yeah. Well, when did that start? March 2020 really had elevated, and it never came down after that. And your doctor saying, hey, you might not make it to retirement age. I've got to give, again, the CISO job is what the CISO job is, right? And it's different in different companies. Where I was, it was clear that I couldn't deliver what was needed. So we worked it out. And I think that's what adults and professionals do. Here we are.
Yeah, but it sounds like where you left the org was exponentially better off than where you found it.
I'd like to think so. The challenge, and this is something that really I became concerned about probably the last 5 years I was there, was becoming nose blind.
What do you mean?
When you're in an environment, like someone who works at a waste transfer station, right? You drive by when you're like, oh my God, that's the worst smell ever. You work there 6 months though, you don't even notice it. As security people, it's easy, especially at a leadership level, to look at maybe some dysfunction in the organization and you just get used to it and you stop realizing the potential negative impact. Or you look back at decisions you made 4 or 5 years ago that then were the right choice, but the world's evolved. And sometimes you have to go, yep, that baby got ugly. Time to rethink how we're doing that. Yeah. And I worked hard to have outside folks come in and look at what we were doing, provide recommendations. Again, having great architects on the team who were willing to, walk into my office, close the door, and go, I just felt something really messed up. And be able to have those conversations was hugely, hugely important. Because I think if you have someone who's been in position for too long and isn't being challenged about the choices they made, it was a great choice 4 years ago. How's that choice holding up, right? Did it age well? And let's be honest, in IT, very few choices age well after about 5 years.
Yeah.
So that drives a lot of it to where it's just you're constantly recycling and moving and casting away and bringing on new. And that's hard to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I imagine too, like, there's a nuance here that I'm hearing, at least in my mind. Like, I think about it in terms of orgs I've worked at. And from a self-preservation stress management perspective, you almost have to accept certain fires you can't put out right now. Like you said earlier, there's 1,000 things to do. You can only get to 3 of them. So there's this defense aspect of like, I'm just going to compartmentalize away that problem right now because I can't deal with it right now. It's not my biggest problem. It's not the ones likely to bite me. I'm going to go work on the ones that are likely to. And you're right. You can normalize that as a normalized accepted risk and forget that maybe that's not great. And maybe now it is high enough up your priority stack to go back and revisit. But I think that's a tough balance.
It's understanding the operating environment you're in. Right. This is where I think a lot of my training in the Army came in. It's like you're constantly reassessing the environment. And what was the right choice 20 minutes ago might be a highly suboptimal choice right now. And you have to be able to pivot. You have to be able to change. You have to be able to adapt. And as a leader, you need to be able to explain to your folks why you're doing it. Because otherwise they just look at you like, have you lost your mind?
That's a separate question.
Well, the answer is yes, and I'm working on it. But it's just one of those things where there's a level. I don't want to say this. Everyone who wants to be a CISO, a significant fraction should, because they can't flex. They can't think. They don't even realize they're in a box, much less be able to think outside of it.
Right.
And, I think the 3 of us, without naming names, we know some people who are like that.
I absolutely was like that earlier in my career. I was super rigid and super dogmatic, and it did not serve me well. It took a lot to learn to be more flexible.
I think that's where some of the best conversations you and I had was very early in the podcast, to where you came across very dogmatic, and you and I had some great conversations around, Andy, just chill a little bit.
It's an interesting point. I look back to the early days of this podcast, and I cringe a lot, but I think I read some wisdom. If you don't look back at your earlier years and think of yourself as an idiot, then you haven't learned anything, you haven't grown, and that's the only solace I could tell myself. But
way back in the day, I had a podcast that we did, the Southern Front Security podcast, and one of the things that Andy and I did is we recorded episode 0.5. And it's somewhere out there in archive.org. And when we made it, we were super proud of it. Every year, though, I would force myself to sit down and listen to it and go, that's just, but remembering where you came from and what you need to do, and realizing you do need to change, and understanding that the change is not bad. So I think people get caught into this thing of that's the way we've always done it. I know in healthcare, we hear a lot of that from the physicians. I mean, when I first got into healthcare, EMRs were just becoming more or less a requirement. And the number of physicians who retired because they didn't want to move off of paper was...
EMR is electronic medical records?
Electronic medical record system, yeah. It's your Epic, it's your Cerner, it's your Allscripts. And there were a lot of physicians who just couldn't handle it because that's not the way we've done it before.
Mm-hmm.
And because people don't like change. People don't... You know, and as CISOs, our job is to inject change into an organization. That's 100% of our job. We've got to be able to sell that change and then manage the change and then come back 6 months later and say, we need to change it again. So if you're not selling it and you're not understanding what, the people you need to sell it to, where they're coming from, you're likely to fail. The OODA loops on the adversary side are getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And I feel like the OODA loops for most organizations are getting wider and wider. I think as security folks, we've got strategically to figure out how to make that better in a way that the business can handle it. Because you can't just go to the business and say, please chuck all that technology. I can't protect it. They're going to look at you like you've grown a third eye in your forehead and sprouted extra, limbs and go, you just need to go. Right. And I think that's a lot of the reason, I think it's been a while, but the average CISO tenure was like 22, 26 months, something like that. And I think a lot of it's due to, there are people like me who spend 10 and a half years, but I think a lot of it is where that average gets messed up is you have people who walk in and they're pedantic and didactic and it's my way or the highway. And it's like, well, there's the highway over there. Please avail yourself. And it's just, it's interesting to watch, especially, I'm now at a point in my career where, folks I was mentoring 10 years ago are moving into CISO roles. And it's always interesting to have that first conversation with them when they've been in there about 3 or 4 months. And they're like, this is nothing like I thought it would be. Well, it isn't. Or I think the best conversation I had with someone, she told me that I never thought that some of the stuff you were telling me was true. But I get that. Okay. It's okay. But yeah, it's just security is such an interesting profession to be in right now.
Jerry, I feel like I've been peppering all the questions. So back to you, sir.
So, what did you find, and I'm going to struggle to form the question well, but what did you find successful to continue challenging yourself on behalf of the business? Because it's exhausting. I mean, look, being a CISO is exhausting. You have so many plates on the ends of sticks, and you also have to continue to ask yourself, am I doing the right thing? Am I focusing on the right thing? Have I gone off track? What needs to change? And I'm curious if you found something that worked for you.
Yeah, so I mentioned before the architects I had, when I hired an architect, I made sure they understood their job was to disagree with me a lot. Their job was to, when it's, the two of us in an office or in a tight group, to be that contrarian, to be that person who is screaming into the void. And if it's someone you respect and trust and they understand the goals of the organization, my architects were amazing. Every single one of them. And if they brought a concern, I had to force myself, but I wanted to pause and go, tell me why this concerns you. Right? There were, oh my gosh, the number of times that between the architects I had where it's like, a light bulb goes off above your head to where you didn't follow the chain of potential events like they did. And boy, howdy, they're right. We need to do something. But a lot of times, as often as that, it's like, okay, this is, as an architect, this is the field of view you have. I have a larger field of view. Let me read you into the larger field of view and why the legitimate concern you have, it's not an incorrect concern, is being addressed a different way. And that's how my architects grew, how they really learned the business. And over time, they became much more incisive with the guidance they brought and the ideas they brought to the table, which, I mean, that's exactly what you want as a CISO. You want people who are there to help you get the org to where it needs to be.
So, and I guess next question, and maybe a little bit different path. I logically think of, and I'm inferring, right? You have kind of two worlds. You have a more traditional IT office environment, and you have your, roughly speaking, operational environment. And the IT environment, I think, is, I infer, looks and operates much like many other organizations. You have email, you have people working on PowerPoints and Excels and whatnot. But at the same time, they have additional risk, right? I guess the risk is not necessarily different. The harms, the perils that can come are different, both from a regulatory perspective, but also from, like if they do end up clicking on something that launches ransomware and that takes you offline for a certain period of time, that could harm patients. And so, do you see in that kind of non-operational environment that you took a more aggressive or conservative approach to security than what you might see in other organizations?
Yeah, I did. And what made my job at Northside the unicorn role was the organization got it. They realized they were, the senior leadership there was willing to pause. And, if I brought an issue and, talked about the situation, provide some background analysis and a recommendation, again, from prior, my field of view is this, the people who run the organization, their view is this, and there would be a conversation. But, Northside was and is a very security conscious organization because, again, security is tied to patient safety, and the number one job of healthcare is patient safety. So by getting us embedded into that, made the conversations easier. Security, for the most part, became we want to make your job more secure because of the patient. And it wasn't us inflicting security. It was us going, help me, help you, help me, help you. And again, it's about those relationships and your ability to sell stuff. And I don't want to say selling stuff in a negative way. It's being able to effectively communicate with people what you want to do and why you want to do it and why it's in their best interest, why this is important. Why should you find those Windows NT 4.0 devices and let's work together to find some budget to get them off the network, right? And if you can start doing that in healthcare, people begin to trust you so that when something bizarre happens and you need to go to them and go, hey, I'm really sorry, but I need to block your access to the vendor that supports your machines that do a thing because they just got rinsed. They're okay. We'll activate whatever processes we need to. And because you have that credibility, you can step in and go, we're aligned on the same goal. We're aligned on the same mission. I know something you don't. Here's something I have to do. And we're going to monitor, we're going to fix, and we'll hopefully get it reconnected as soon as we can, but in the interest of the patient. And again, people, sometimes give me a hard time saying that, was Northside perfect? No job is perfect. No org is perfect. But when it came to my role and what I tried to do, I don't know of a place that could do it better. Just candidly.
Nice.
Well, I mean, the good news is, I imagine all of your stakeholders you're working with had very low ego and very just calm, understanding demeanors.
Absolutely. It was, tea and scones at every quarterly update meeting.
I
We
mean,
spent the first 90 minutes just kind of talking about each other's kids and grandkids.
sure.
And absolutely, Andy, you totally nailed it.
And oddly, impeccable handwriting skills across the company.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Sorry. So one thing I was curious about that we kind of touched on and we moved away from is, and you don't go too far into this if this is like gets into privileged information, but for these devices you can't patch and you can't replace, and you can't touch and you can't load EDR and you can't, like, what were some strategies that you could use to protect them?
All right. Couple different ways to approach it. One is herd immunity, right? If I can get EDR on 80% of my devices, I'm probably going to see the problem before it actually gets to them. Not guaranteed, but it's my best bet.
Sure.
The other, a lot of it is also just understanding as best you can what needs to talk to that critical device and restricting it as much as you can. The challenge in a lot of healthcare environments, though, is because a lot of medical devices do not respond well to high latency, hospital networks are very, very flat. When I first got there, I'm dating myself big time. Someone at Juniper wrote a article about this thing called routing from the edge, where even on a Class A network, nothing was more than 4 hops from anything else, and they did that. And at that point, you're like, okay, this is what I inherited. All right, we're going to slowly start making changes. But you do what you can. Now, fortunately, with some of the devices, and this is a weird thing, how many adversaries out there know how to deal with Windows CE or have exploits for it?
That's true.
They don't, right? So sometimes having really old tech kind of protects you. I'm hesitant to say it because that's not, that is not a long-term strategy. But it's one of those things you realize as you're boiling through all the things you need to protect, there's some stuff that is so esoteric, right, that only a nation state actor would come after it. And I can't stop them, right? If the SVR or the MSS wants that, they're going to get it. And so I'm going to focus on the 99.9% of the other people who are likely coming after me, and I'm going to protect everything I can.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd imagine that really old stuff is more likely to just be fragile on its TCP/IP stack and easily fall over if you're not careful with it.
Yeah, there was an EMR that back in the day we worked with that if you did a vuln scan, you could knock the EMR over.
Yep.
Yep. It's funny. Every company I have ever worked for, and indeed every business unit of every company I've ever worked for, even though none of them have been healthcare, have had similar challenges.
Of course.
Whether it was the HMCs for mainframes, if you vuln scan those, they fall over. Historically, every place that I've ever been that has produced software has had to operate entire fleets without traditional security software because they're trying to mimic customer environments, and customer environments sometimes are using like really old versions of Windows. So I think the kinds of challenges that you see, I'm not certainly the importance of them are nowhere near. It's obviously nowhere near as significant. But I think some of the same challenges exist in lots of organizations, and I don't often see enough thought going into how to design around that limitation. So that's a good discussion.
Totally. Yeah, I think you're right. Because again, within healthcare, I mean, the challenge in healthcare is we look, if you drew a Venn diagram, healthcare overlaps with a lot of different places. I mean, we have retail outlets, every single place where you hand your, card over to pay your copay, that's retail, right? There's going to be a point of sale device there. And so you have that problem. You also, the way healthcare works is I'm taking a payment from you, but I'm also probably getting payments from third-party providers. So I'm essentially running a financial services in the background, right? And I have this care environment that we worry about. But then I have also the other interesting things. For example, especially, for my brothers and sisters who were in a teaching hospital, right? You've now got a university attached to you. Go with God. Because, we, at Northside, we had our, Cancer Research Institute. And as you threat model, you're like, who wants to come after that? And so you've got to grab the best ideas from all these different industries, figure out how to implement the inner environment, and prioritize what you're protecting. Until very recently, PCI was not even a thought in my shop. The organization really wasn't interested because, let's be honest, let's say that, if you've seen, my wife just had some carpal tunnel surgery done. The copay was like $60, but the bill was like $13,000. Okay, so you're going to penalize me 2 points or 4 points or whatever on every credit card transaction. Yeah, that's not going to matter. But it's by, as a healthcare CISO, you have to balance all those equities, and you can have people who want you to do something. I had stakeholders in the organization who were wanting me to bring more security. But if I did, it would have ended badly for everyone. I'm like, just pause. Limited resources. I'm doing these other things. And some folks were, why are you making me do this? And most folks just rolled with the punches, and we had to make changes. And, the organization, I think 99% of the time, it wasn't an issue. I think sometimes as leaders, we overanalyze how people are going to react to a change.
Mm-hmm.
People are so much more resilient. Especially I look in healthcare, and this is where the pandemic really sealed it for me, is the ability of physicians, nurses, physician assistants, and just the staff at practices and inside the hospitals to adapt to a horrific environment and stay focused on delivering care. You kind of realize how resilient and flexible they can be. And for me, at least, it was a level of pride in those folks and being part of that organization, but also making sure we didn't take advantage of it. It was there if and when we absolutely needed it. But security and healthcare can't be constantly leveraging that. It's an emergency. It's an emergency.
Yeah.
It's an emergency. Because at that point, they're like, you're full of crap, and you start getting ignored. So yeah, it's about managing those, especially as a CISO. I mean, as a CISO, I spent 2/3 of my time selling my program, one way or the other. And the other 1/3 was, working with my staff to actually make sure the program was advancing. And I was very lucky my entire time there to have some fantastic folks on my staff who really, where the rubber hit the road, that's where they were. I could just point them in a direction to say, take that hill, and they would go take that hill. But it's especially since, through from 2020 to today, healthcare InfoSec has been incredibly interesting. Because if you think, one of the things that about 4 years ago, there was some legislation that established the 405D group, which is part of OCR, where they actually sat down. So we start with HIPAA, right? And HIPAA says, hey, if you can follow all of the NIST rules, you're okay. I don't know of a single org that can follow all of the NIST rules. It is especially not in civilian world. So then we get to the cybersecurity framework, which was great advancement. But what 405D did, and this is some inside baseball on healthcare security, the HHS did a very smart thing. They grabbed healthcare providers, they grabbed people from the actual security industry, and they grabbed people who do security in healthcare. And they said, what's the right thing for people to do? So what 405D did was they broke organizations into small, medium, large. And if you're small, here are the things you need to be able to do. If you're medium, you got to do that plus these. If you're large, you got to do all that plus these. And what I loved about 405D was it was written in healthcare jargon. I felt comfortable just taking some of those presentations and handing them to a hospital executive because it was written in language they understood. I didn't need to go through the translation process. And my hope is that more hospital CISOs are realizing that resource is there and are leveraging it. But that's what the sales job is. It's connecting the mutually desired outcomes and what the path to that outcome is.
So I have the hardest question. Why do people have such a hard time spelling HIPAA?
Well, it's usually because people haven't eaten in a while and they're very hungry. And also, it is what it is. I mean, and that was actually one of my favorite tells is you'd get some, marketing email and they would do HIPAA with 2 Ps. And you're like, yeah, nope, nobody, nope.
It was always a self-screen on resumes.
Absolutely.
When I was hiring.
Doing HIPAA with 2 Ps on a resume is definitely putting you in the I don't think so pile.
Wait, it's one? Hang on, I got to change something.
HIPAA.
Wait, 2 A's?
Healthcare Insurance Portability and Accountability Act.
I got it all wrong.
That doesn't shock me at all.
Hey, so we want to be respectful of your time. There's like 1,000 other things we could talk about. But one thing I do want to talk about for run out of time is now that you've started to take a well-deserved break, what's next? What do you want to do now?
So what do I want to do when I grow up? So I'm 5-6 years from retiring, and then my wife and I getting into an RV and spending hopefully 5 to 6 years full-time RVing around the country.
Nice.
We've been planning this for literally a decade. So right now I've stood up a small LLC, and the goal is, because I want to help people get better. I want to take everything I've learned and help people pragmatically do everything they can. So I'm moving into the consulting world, looking at some folks who, I'm on their bench and they can bring me in if they need to. But yeah, it's started the process of standing all that up about a couple of weeks ago, and have learned a lot about marketing and websites, and the fact that I hate DNS so much. TXT records, they're the worst. They're the literal...
Especially when you start running out of space in your DNS records for them.
Yeah. So, because I'm not the world's most technical guy, right? That was never my forte. But when
we can get you a kid from down the street to help you.
Have you met the kids down the street from me, Andy?
Sorry, please go on.
But it's one of those things where I'm learning a lot, and I think that's my happy place. is where I'm getting to learn some new stuff, do a new thing, hopefully help some people out. And in 5 years or so, Melissa and I will be in an RV, and you won't hear from me anymore because we're going to be out there doing all the stuff that, we've worked hard to get ourselves ready for.
Well, I think that's well deserved. So any particular type of consulting, like healthcare focused, or just general CISO type, virtual CISO work?
Fractional CISO, virtual CISO, strategy work, leaning into healthcare because that's what I know best. And I think that's what differentiates me from a lot of other folks. The organization is called Carasso Partners. Carasso is an Esperanto word for armor or defense. And having been an armor officer in the Army, and the fact that I want this to be sort of an international thing, Esperanto being a language specifically designed, it was intended for the League of Nations and the United Nations to use Esperanto as the universal language. Spoiler, it didn't go over that well. But, so Carasso Partners is just me right now. I'm talking with a couple of other folks who might be interested in using the umbrella. But I'm so fortunate to be in a position to where I'm not scrambling and I can do this the way I want, the right way. And
that's great.
I'm super excited.
Yeah. Well, if there's anything we can do to help, I'll just offer Jerry's assistance right now because he's an unemployed bum.
So Jerry, how well do you know DNS?
I know DNS actually very well.
Because at some point, I'm also going to have to stand up some Active Directory, and I understand you're the biggest fan of Active Directory.
I love Active Directory. It's my favorite.
But in all seriousness, if we can help,
I appreciate it, guys.
Yeah.
And again, we've known each other for a very, very long time. So for the viewers, the first time I actually met Andy in person, he was a sales engineer for Optiv, or was it Optiv?
Previous to Optiv, it was before they merged. It was Accuvant.
Yeah. So
those were the dark days. The dark days.
No, you were a good SC, my friend. A very good SC.
Not according to the sales reps I worked with.
From the customer perspective, and the customer's always right.
Thank
you.
We've
known each other for a long time, and super glad to be here. And hey, glad to talk again if we need to.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I had a huge list in my head of things we could talk about that I know you have amazing insights into, and we barely even hit the list. So I would love to have you back if you got time and willingness.
I will make time.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
So
it was a good discussion.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I think so.
Absolutely. No, I'm just going to wrap us up. Thanks everybody for listening. And hey, this is a new format for us. It's a new show, new feed. We'd love to have you tell your friends about it if you think it's interesting. And if you know of some cool guests that Jerry and I can interrogate, let us know. In the meantime, give us some love on your podcast platform of choice. If you like the show, if you don't like the show, we'll still take the love because who doesn't want love in this world? It's a tough world.
We all need love.
Jerry, working. It's true. Well, you have cats and orchids, so you're fine. You're good.
You're not going to say like, share, subscribe?
I could, but then we'd be like everybody else.
Send money. There we go.
It's fair. Anyway, Jerry, where can they find more information?
Gettingdefensive.com is where you can find this episode, and we'll drop a couple links in there. Any place that you'd like to send people to learn more about you, Martin?
Yeah, Carasso Partners, Kraso partners.com. Please forgive the website. It's only about 5 days old.
And the DNS. Don't look at the DNS either.
Please don't look at the text records. It's a mess. But yeah, if you or whoever is looking for a lot of experience, glad to talk to folks.
Awesome. Well, thank you much, and we will talk again real soon. Thank you, everybody.
Have a great week. Bye-bye.